Hi, everybody. Now, we are coming into a new millennium. Last we left off, Bill Clinton was in office, and well, actually, he was leaving office and actually left our economy in a surplus. Taxes had been cut, there was money spent on education, and our budget was balanced, and we actually had more to spare. So we were in a very prosperous time by the end of the 90s. Now we're going to be moving into the new millennium or the early 2000s. And we're going to start with President George Walker Bush. Sorry, that picture is a little blurry. Get out your notes, get out your highlighters. All right, so let's look at some of the things George Walker Bush. Remember, this is the son. I call him Big George, Little George. This is the son of George Herbert Walker Bush. So he comes in and immediately he goes after this typical conservative plan. He's a Republican, so it makes sense. He promises that he's going to continue the prosperity, but he's going to do similar to what Reagan did, tax cuts for the top, in hopes that if I cut taxes for Walmart, then it'll trickle down and Walmart will give that break to their employees, kind of like Reaganomics. But do big corporations normally pay their employees more or do they pocket the money? Think about that. So he tried to do that, bless his heart, but it did not work. Our economy began to become very, very sluggish, not to mention the wars that we're going to be entering in pretty soon. So, problems. Wars cost too much debt. And in the 1990s, we saw economics changes that challenged our economic leadership, mainly the European Union or the EU. It helped provide provide cooperation, promote trade, develop economy, and adapt a common money system. And therefore, they're strengthening their economies in the EU, which, if the United States isn't following suit, could lead to some economic challenges in the states. So trends from the 90s that kind of spill over into the new millennium. I bet you guys have never seen this before. This is a picture right here of my very first phone. That's exactly what it looked like. I still remember my first phone number. I only had 200 minutes a month. I don't know if you can imagine that, but I survived 200 minutes a month, and there was no texting. We get lots of technological booms, of course, the cell phone, but we also get an influx of immigrants, and that's very important. Please highlight and star that. However, a lot of these immigrants are working very menial jobs for low pay. A lot of big companies are hiring these immigrants because it's cheaper to hire an immigrant than it is per se to hire an American. So when we're talking about immigration, who really do we need to really look at when we're looking at illegal immigration? People or bigger companies? We're getting a lot of loss of manufacturing jobs. We want to do things cheaply. So we're sending a lot of our jobs to India, to Mexico. A lot of the cars in the 90s and the early 2000s were made in Mexico, Peru, and China, because it's cheaper to do it that way. But what happens as a result? We are losing the ability to make things in America, which hampers our jobs. Labor unions, due to a more conservative administration, are declining. What is a labor union? You remember way back from the progressive unit. It's the idea that people can come together and organize. You know what? I don't believe I should be working 30 hours a day or 25 hours over 2 days or whatever. I believe in better working conditions. So we're going to organize and lobby the government for better working conditions. Well, a lot of those better working conditions cost big companies, which Bush is giving tax cuts to, cost them a lot of money. So labor unions are kind of tucked away and kind of declined due to the administration take on them. We get a need for more Social Security due to the aging of the baby boomers. Believe it or not, with all of these new technological advances, people are living longer. And it's what we call the graying of America. Please highlight and star the graying of America. We, as a nation, in order to keep things afloat, we need people to die. We actually do. It's the cycle of life, and Social Security is there to pay, and then you die. Eventually, you don't get any more, and then you build up the pot again. But with these aging boomers, due to technology and the graying of America, means people are living longer, and then people are not having as many babies. It's becoming more expensive to fund Social Security. So that is also pulling on the economy, which makes it sluggish. Medical advancements, prolonged life, need for daycare for these older Americans, and need for more care for the elderly. We are getting what's called gentrification, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but people are moving back to the cities. They moved out to the suburbs at first, but now they're moving back to the cities. They want to be close. They want to be walkable, kind of like everything you see going on in Charlotte or wherever your major cities are, where everybody wants to eat, live, work, and play. But with these revitalization of these inner cities, housing costs a lot more. And people were taking on these risky mortgages that we called them balloon mortgages, or they were called ARMs. So let me give you an example. You go to the bank, you're 20 years old, you make $30,000 a year. You see this house, it's $250,000. You're like, oh, I want that house. You probably shouldn't get it because you can't afford to pay for it. But the bank says, I know what I'll do. We'll loan you the money, and every month the payment will go up, and hopefully you'll get raises on your jobs, and then your mortgage will go up. Well, what did you think happened? Actually, due to the influx of immigrants and the influx of jobs going overseas, people didn't get raises, but the mortgages kept going up. So we get a mortgage crisis, and that's kind of how it happened. We get growth in computers, internet, email, cell phones, like I said earlier. So we got a lot of good inventions, got a lot of good technological movements. But again, these all are going to pull and kind of slug our economy down. Labor unions declining, outsourcing, the graying of America, and risky mortgage practices. The new millennium continued. Let me move this and then move my face a little more so I can get out of your way. All right, environmentalists observed science now, this is just science, the diminishing of the rainforest. And they began to notice that summers were hotter than they had ever been on record. We're talking about record heat. Several summers in a row. Disasters such as the Exxon oil spill in 1989 began to raise gas prices in 2000. And what it did was really kind of illustrate our dependence on, please highlight this. This is a question on your post-assessment, fossil fuels, and the ecological and economic havoc that would result in. While the new millennium brought a lot of technology, it also did bring a lot of pull on our environment and people putting the environment on the back burner, and we're getting more dependent on fossil fuels, which wasn't good. Make sure you write down the dependency on fossil fuels. Highlight that. Let's talk about September 11th, 2001. We all know, I remember like it was yesterday. I was at Winthrop University in Rock Hill. I was laying in my dorm, Margaret Nance in my bunk bed, and Terry Breland ran into my room, and she said, "Y'all, somebody just hit the Twin Towers." And I'm like, "Well, that's happened before." But no, like they're attacking America. We all ran in the common room and watched it. 2 planes flew into the World Trade Center. 1 plane flew into the Pentagon. 1 was taken down by passengers. I think that's Flight 93. It was immediately linked to Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, which we had already, a lot of people said, created a vacuum in that area by some of the things that had happened in the 80s and 90s. With world support, we immediately began to support the invasion of Afghanistan. We would be in that war almost 18 years and continuing. The overthrow of the Taliban, who gave Al Qaeda basically their sanctioning there. It's one of the causes of it. The result would be the Patriot Act. We all began to become suspicious of each other, suspicious of Muslims, suspicious of people from different backgrounds. So the Patriot Act, and you can highlight that allows government and Homeland Security, and that's how we get Homeland Security, believe it or not, as a result of September 11th, to be able to look through your files, to be able to look through your phone records in the name of keeping the United States safe. Remember, if you ever need to stop and pause, please do, to copy things down. President Bush believed that the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was in possession of weapons of mass destruction. And this is where things begin to fall apart. Okay. A lot of people and even historians today would agree that that was kind of misguided. It was come to find that there were no weapons of mass destruction. That's what President Bush had believed and kind of led him to immediately declare war without kind of thinking through things. Hindsight being 2020, if you're in Congress and two planes, hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, it's easy to say now, well, I wouldn't have voted for that. You never know what you would have done when you're attacked at that time. US, Great Britain, and other countries invaded Iraq immediately. We didn't really check. We really didn't make sure first or get intel. We kind of just acted first and then asked questions later. Us and our allies invaded Iraq to overthrow Hussein, eventually bringing democracy to Iraq. But Hussein was caught, tried by the Iraqi Special Tribunal. He was executed. Obviously, he was guilty of crimes against humanity. You can see some of the pictures of him being executed. He overthrew the Sunni-dominated government, we overthrew the Sunni-dominated government and held more democratic elections, but there was still no peace. The Sunni and the Shia, two different religious groups, Muslims, and they began to war on each other, and there was still no peace after that. Let's look at post 9/11. We get another set of tax cuts as a result because we're in war and we need money to fund this war effort. And he also, George Bush, passes legislation called No Child Left Behind, meaning every child must be on grade level in America by 2010. That did not happen. But it was very stressful and it was a huge overhaul of education. It introduced a lot of accountability and a lot of standardized testing. We get a lot of faith-based initiatives under George W. Bush, but we do get some corporate scandals and, of course, the war on terrorism. We already talked about the Patriot Act. Hurricane Katrina, the year 2005, that's another thing that happened under his administration. If you look, and I'll probably maybe see if I can find a video on Hurricane Katrina if you're interested in watching it. It's some of the most touching footage you'll ever see when we get a Category 5 hurricane to hit New Orleans and the effect of what storms have on poverty and what that looks like in America. You can take a whole class on Katrina. It's pretty interesting. It looked like a third world country right in the United States. And then we get the election of 2008. A senator from Chicago, Barack Obama. He ran against Republican John McCain, and he wins. He becomes the first African American president. Under him, obviously, we had took a huge dive with being involved in wars, invading, and a sluggish economy. We have a meltdown of the stock market right as he's coming in to office. So he has to bail out the banks, the insurance, and the auto industry to save millions of jobs his first 100 days in office. He came into record deficits and tried to offset these by employing green technologies, bringing the business back from overseas back to America to create more jobs. And he tried to stop our dependence on foreign oil and fossil fuels. And the most important piece of legislation that is passed under the Obama administration is what is known as the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Again, it is still in flux and in debate today, the Supreme Court, but ultimately the goal was to ensure that every person in the nation was provided with some form of health insurance. And sadly, that is the end of American history, too.